Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in From Paul to Valentinus by Peter Lampe, published in 2003. We're going to look at chapter 4, and it's going to give us a look at the emerging cults that infiltrated Rome from the east. This will be pages 48 to 68. Let's go to block 1. Cults enter through the eastern trade routes. Trastevere included the Tiber Island and the right bank of the Tiber and the hills of the Vatican. Buildings in this area dated to the 1st century, and it was an area surrounded by gardens. Now the harbor quarter ran from the brickyards of the Vatican slopes, and it accommodated harbor workers and shopkeepers, and dealt with imported goods, and also the grain mills were located in this area. Administration by the vicus. Each was governed by 4 magistrates. Trastevere grew to have 78 vici, 78 in just 30 years. Inhabitants were crowded together. So Trastevere was a very crowded area of population. The emigration from the east and the cults. Trastevere became open to incoming cults like Cybele and Isis from Alexandria, Zeus from Greece, and even Syrian deities. So many different cultic worship deities immigrated in from the east. So that especially developed in the region of Trastevere. Now block 2, the brothels, the communal baths, and the cults. The Appian Valley, specifically the Porta Capena, transport workers lived here. It was populated with brothels, and it had a thermal communal bath. Now the Aventine Hill, that initially was populated by lower class until the fire in 36 AD. Then it was cleared away for the upper class aristocracy. But cult presence was even on the Aventine, lesser in number than the Trastevere, but significant enough. Cults to Jupiter from Syria, cults to Isis, cults to Mithras, and Mithras was worshipped by Roman soldiers. There was a Mithraeum with many cultic frescoes inside, and the Mithraeum was destroyed by the Christians in 400 AD. So block 1 and 2, what they give us is a picture of the East communicating with the West through trade routes. And along with trade came foreign ideas and foreign cults. And the culture became very pagan. So even though Christians resided in Trastevere and along Port Capena, they were surrounded by a very pagan culture. Brothels were in the area because it was a port entry area. And cultic worship was everywhere. From Egypt, from Alexandria, but even from Syria, Antioch. So the picture that Lampe wants us to recognize here is that the Christian population was immersed in the midst of a very diverse pagan environment, and not the best of social conditions. Basically, the conditions were crowded. There were a few Christians who prospered, but a majority were poor and lived in the area of Trastevere. Now, a few Christians did reside in the Aventine Hill area, so there were some that did gain wealth, but the majority did not, and lived in the Trastevere area. And it was definitely a very pagan environment in the early centuries. So block 3, a 4-point summary, is very specific by Lampe. A pagan environment surrounded Christianity. The greater population lived in Trastevere and Porta Capena, but there were a few wealthy Christians that lived on the Aventine. Eastern cults pervaded all regions, arriving from the eastern trade routes. So the picture we have, I think, is accurate from Lampe here, and the obvious conclusion is that along with trade routes comes foreign ideas and even cultic worship. And the Mithras cult was huge in Rome. The Mithras cult was a mystical cultic religion, and it was the cult that every Roman soldier was a part of. So these Mithriums did appear. These worship areas for Mithras, Mithriums, they did appear, and it was a very prevalent cultic presence in eastern Rome, where east met west. So in block 1, I think what we want to take from block 1 is the fact that note 4, that Trastevere, which was a densely Christian populated area, was open to incoming cults from Alexandria, Egypt, and from Greece, and from Syria, Antioch. So from block 1, I think note 4 leads us to the evidence that Lampe wants us to recognize that the environment was pagan, that surrounded the Christian population. Now in block 2, we need to recognize that the larger populated area for Christians was the Appian Valley. A few, very few, more well-to-do Christians lived on the Aventine Hill, but cultic presence cut across both cultures. The Trastevere and the Aventine both were infiltrated by cultic practices. Very, very prevalent regardless of your social status. And the Mithrium was very evident. The cult of Mithras was very popular. So the 4-point summary in block 3 from Lampe is as follows. A pagan environment surrounded Christianity. The greater population lived in Trastevere and Porta Capena. Wealthy Christians lived on the Aventine. But regardless of where they lived, Eastern cults pervaded all regions, arriving from Eastern trade routes. That's what Lampe wants us to recognize in these few pages of chapter 4. Very specifically, the aristocracy did take over the Aventine area, so the wealthier citizens lived on the Aventine, but the Trastevere was a port of entry, and the Trastevere was densely populated, but from basically lower and lower middle class citizens, and the Christian population was the largest in the Trastevere area. A few lived in the Aventine area, but just a few had acquired that kind of wealth, because obviously in the previous lesson there was a Christian bank in the business district, so there were a few that had acquired wealth, but the majority lived in the Trastevere area. But regardless of your social status, pagan environment defined the culture within which Christians lived. So block 1, note 1, Trastevere was the Christian area of population. Tiber Island and close to the port entry area also. It was administered by a VC, or 4 magistrates would govern each area. Trastevere had 78 VC, 78 in just 30 years. So it grew to a very large population, a very large population. And a few Christians had acquired wealth in the early centuries. They lived on the Aventine, but that was a minority, and cultic presence was everywhere. And for Rome, the Mithras cult, a mystical cult, was very, very prevalent. The Mithraeum worship areas were everywhere. So that gives us a quick look at chapter 4, pages 48 to 68. And our next lesson is going to be chapter 5. It'll be pages 69 to 89. So next lesson will be 69 to 89. It'll be chapter 5. But this gives us a kind of a look at where we want to see the incoming cultic presence. Because eventually I'm sure that Lampe is going to bring us to that point where we recognize the infiltration of Gnosticism from Alexandria, because Valentinus was a key figure for the Gnostic faith, and obviously that came from Alexandria along the trade route. So that's where he's leading us, but this gives us our first step in that direction. That'll wrap up pages 48 to 68. We'll pick up next time on chapter 5.